So what, the session I'm going to deliver is really broad. It was this bit of, can you give us something on this? It's like, yeah, I could do that. But recognizing that all of those topics, that we've been talking about, you could easily make 45 minutes out of one of those things, like communications or fatigue, those sorts of things. So what I'm going to do is provide a bit of a sort of an oversight of human factors, non-technical skills, the differences, looking at what outcomes are about and how we can improve those, and then looking at a couple of aspects of non-technical skills, and then really just please store up the questions, because one of the hardest bits, even when you're watching these sorts of things, is you go, oh yeah, that's triggered a thought process. I'll remember when I get to the end of the session. And I pretty much guarantee it's really difficult to do so, because there is a lot of stuff going on. So please, as the thought comes up, type it into the chat window or the Facebook Live, and that one we can pick up the answers from there. So this is, I do a lot of underwater photography when I'm going diving. So this is a wreck that's is in about 65 meters off the coast of Malta, and a buddy of mine. So moving on then. So diving, that's my sort of real passion, and trying to bring the sort of the concept of human factors, non-technical skills, just culture into the diving area. And this is a documentary which was inspired by Martin Bromley's Just a Routine Operation from more than 10 years ago. And this is another tragic accident told through the lens of human factors and just culture. And it's just bringing everything together to try and change attitudes. And that's really, I can't change people. I can't force change. What I can do is start telling stories so that people are curious as to how and why we behave the way they do, or the way we do as well. Because in hindsight, we just look at these things and go, oh, that's so irrational. Why would you do this? And that's what I'm going to explore a little bit more as we go through the session. So what is human factors? It's a huge topic, and it starts, this is from a paper by Neville and Moray, looking at human factors in the rail industry and saying, well, what is it? It's this sort of onion that you can just unpick. And unfortunately, in healthcare, as I perceive it anyway, and part of that's because it's come from aviation, human factors is seen as these areas here that I've highlighted in red: perceptions, thought, decision-making, the attention span, communication, cooperation, the sorts of stuff that we would put under this bucket of crew resource management or non-technical skills. But actually, human factors is way bigger than that. Now, that's a pretty sort of complex picture to look at. So what I like to do is bring it right down to something that people can sort of relate to. So we've got Homer Simpson. He's, why he's there, but, he's the nuclear plant operator. He's been there for ages. So he will have had his habits that he's developed. He's got a console that's in front of him that just is a mess. There are buttons and lights and controls that are just all over the place. Now, he's also got a bit of a sugar habit. So, every hour he's got to sit there and eat a donut and drink coffee to keep alert. And at the same time, he's got Mr. Burns either physically or mentally sitting over his shoulder going, keep the power on, you've got to do it. And he's sitting there going, I'm not competent, I don't know how to do this. But it's all right because it all runs automatically and hey, nothing goes wrong. Until sort of 5 minutes to the hour when his blood sugar level is down, his caffeine is down, his attention is just not where it should be. And then there's a whole bunch of lights appear on the panel. And it's like, what am I doing? And ends up selecting the wrong thing, shuts down the power. And then there's Mr. Burns going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. And all of these things. And it's just like, how to design a system that is just not got human factors in mind. So, the simplest way I could say is making it easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing. And here's some examples that have come from, clinical environment that I've seen. So anesthetic machine on the left-hand side, two buttons looking very similar. One does one thing and one shuts the machine off. And it's just designed by engineers who don't understand the operational environment in which people are going to be dealing with it. These bits of equipment we need to be operating need to be designed with somebody who's at 3 o'clock in the morning, where their attention levels are really low, their blood sugar levels are low. All of the stuff that's working against them, you need to design the system for that. The one in the middle is a door exit, but it's also a door alarm. And, you know, the bits of paper that says, the post-it notes that are there says door release, horrible noise. And you sit there and go, why would somebody put an alarm next to the standard exit? And you sit there and go, well, look above the exit box and there's a single conduit there. To put another box in, you've now got to run a conduit, another conduit up somewhere else. And people are efficient, lazy, depending on which way you look at it, to get, you know, the most done with the least amount of effort. And from an engineer putting that together, a workman putting that together, hey, look, it's not a problem. You know, one's green and you press the other button. And then on the right-hand side, we've got about designing medication so that it's easier to pick the right drug up and not the wrong one. And so, you know, on the top is what it used to look like. And on the bottom, this heparin, this is what it looks like on the right-hand side. It is now very different to the flushing fluid that's there. And I'm sure that you've got lots of examples of your own work environment where it doesn't, rather you have to pay lots of attention to make sure you get the right drugs. You know, they're all labeled the same. They've got similar names because the branding is there. And so it's about, as I said, designing those things. Now, non-technical skills or no-techs or CRM are a subset of the bigger human factors. And fundamentally, CRM, non-technical skills, is about creating a shared mental model amongst the operational team or the operating team, plus the other stakeholders that are there. And non-technical skills is not the same as human factors. And it's a really crucial bit because people go, oh yeah, well, I've had human factors training. And it's like, you probably haven't. What you've probably had is some CRM non-technical skills training to understand about communication and teamwork and decision-making, leadership, collaboration, cooperation, those sorts of things, as opposed to how to look at a system and say, am I setting somebody up for success or am I setting somebody up for failure? And I can't remember what the numbers are. I know Stephen Shorrock has posted these fairly regularly on Twitter, but the number of trusts that are out there who've got human factors professionals within them, I think you could count on 2 hands. That's it. And it's like, well, it's just seen as something that it's a nice to do. And you say, actually, how much do we spend fixing errors and investigations when actually we could look at things differently? So in healthcare, there are lots of tensions that we've got, and this is from a great paper by from Cook and Rasmussen talking Going Solid, and in which they talk about these 3 pressures that we're talking about. So we've got finance, economic pressures. We go up into the top right, we go bust. We run out of money and we can't do what we need to do. We go down to the bottom right and we run out of effort. We run out of manpower, resource. We can't do what's there. And on the left-hand side, what we've got is performance, brackets, safety. And what we try to do is we stay away from this, what you could say, unacceptable performance boundary where a failure or an accident happens. So we build in an error margin that says, okay, this area here, this dotted line, that's what we consider our safety margins. And when we have this concept of normalization of deviance, what we do is we erode those error margins, that safety margin, without realizing it. Now, within the same paper, what they were talking about is the difference between high reliability organizations and low reliability organizations. And then on the right-hand side, we've got these sort of stable, low risk systems where actually it's money and resource that drive things. And we're not particularly bothered about the safety aspects because we're a long way away. Now, what they pointed out here is, and why high reliability is important, is because it allows you as a team, as an organization, to sit quite close to the error margin, because you behave in a consistent manner, and so people will respond in a predictable way. So understanding there are limits to where standard operating procedures or SOPs can operate, but that allows us to behave consistently, and we know how people are going to respond. In low reliability organizations or unstable systems, what happens is that they don't necessarily know how they're operating. So in the center of that blurred area, that's where we think we operate, but actually there's a whole bunch of performance variability that's out there that could take us over that error margin, and we eat into it. And now the difficulty is that we don't know where that unacceptable performance is. We don't know the final straw that breaks the camel's back, that causes the accident. Now, in hindsight, it's easy because you go, oh, it's this. In real time, we're dealing with multiple factors that are coming in, and what we're trying to do is get the best out of the organization or the team or the operations themselves. Now, this is from a paper that I co-wrote for the European Society of Thoracic Surgeons two years ago. And what we looked at was that outcomes were traditionally, and still are in many cases, considered to be the focus of technical skills. And if you're good at your job, then you're going to get good outcomes. And you're measured on that sort of performance, that the KPIs that are the key performance indicators that are there. But what we said is, actually, let's look a little bit further than that. Let's look at the context. And what I'm going to do as we go through after this slide is break these down a little bit more. So, the context, the environment, what is it we're operating within when we execute these technical skills? And what you'll notice is there's a times symbol, multiplication factor that's in here. And it's important because we didn't consider them to be additive in nature. Then we've got randomness and luck. So randomness is the population side of it. Luck is how it refers to you. So it could be that at a population sample, and I have no idea what the numbers are, 1 in 10,000 people is allergic to penicillin. It's probably much higher than that, but whatever it is, 1 in a number. Now, that's the population sample. That's the randomness side, because we don't necessarily know what they are. But for me, I will only know that I've got an allergy to antibiotics when somebody gives it to me and I have the reaction. So there's a bit of, sample is, or population is randomness, but to me, it's lucky stroke unlucky. So there is a bit of that goes in here. And then we talk about, actually it was last year, we wrote the paper, last spring. So, and then we look at non-technical skills. And these all work together. So you may have awesome technical skills. You're operating in a brilliant environment. It's well lit, it's well designed. The task is to hand. Everything's working well. Luck is on your side. And what's happened now is that we miss some information because we've had failed communication or flawed communication, which meant that our situation awareness of creating what was happening now and what was going to happen in the future is reduced. And that means that we make a flawed decision. So if we, again, made up numbers, technical skills, 0.9, 1, let's make it ones actually, 1, 1, 1.5, or actually 0.1. Now, actually, we end up with a whole score of just 0.1. So what we've got to look at is that these things all work together, the interdependence of technical skills, context, randomness, and the technical skills that are going on. Now, looking at the technical skill development, that's where we spend time developing the knowledge, and this sort of concept of 10, 20, 70. So 10% of the knowledge developed in the classroom, 20% through peer support and coaching, and then 70% is on the job. And this is the difficulty, is you've got to create the situation where people can learn, and they can learn to fail safely in the operational environment. And I think this is one of the challenges with society, is we expect, especially medical professionals, to be perfect. We expect pilots, aviators to be perfect. We expect anybody who's in a high risk, high consequent job to be perfect. And we're not. We will make mistakes. So we've got to look at how do we develop those technical skills, and how do we maintain them for the diverse environments we're in. And as more technology is included in the tasks, then our learning requirements go up, because it's not just about the technical skill, it's the awareness which is moving into the non-technical aspects. Then we look at the context and the environment, and this is from a brilliant book called Safer Healthcare. And I don't know whether or not it shows up too well. I will share these slides afterwards, so as a PDF you can look at these. But it's looking at the risk environment we're operating in. So you could say healthcare, managing risk. Okay, what do you mean by risk? Because in some areas, you know, on the left-hand side, we're talking about potentially very unsafe. You know, 1 in 100 activities ends up in a fatality. That's the embracing risk and this concept of ultra adaptive. At the other end, which is where sort of aviation's trying to bring itself into healthcare, and you're sitting there going, all right, aviation's ultra safe and we've got to design healthcare like aviation. And you're sitting there going, you can't. There are some aspects of healthcare we can, like, as it says here, radiotherapy, blood transfusion, because we can put lots of processes and checks in place, and it's relatively standardized in how we do things. And then there's the bit in the middle that basically says high reliability. How do we manage that? And what we're doing here is we are managing risk, but we know that things could go wrong, which means that now we've got to be adaptive to the situation. So where you talk about risk management in healthcare, what's the context and what's the environment? Now, the context environment also concerns these aspects, the physical environment. What's it like? Is it, you know, all the stuff that we've had recently from COVID-19 of cramped conditions, the PPE that's in place, temperature, now the temperatures are rising. All of those things impact our performance. What's the cultural environment? You know, what's the expectations of certain behaviors and certain activities? Is there a culture of bullying? You know, because if there is, then people are not going to be able to speak up. The social aspects, and that, you know, culture also is international, not just local to the task itself. Social environment, how easy is it to interact with other people? We are social creatures, and the different personality types that are there that reside within us, where you might have somebody who's very much about time, detail, facts, and you might have somebody who's very much about empathy and relationships, and they may not actually work together. Let me shut that door. Then sort of physical, technical environment with the distractions that are there. So the technical environment, you know, how well is it laid out in terms of the design that we're talking about, the human factors, ergonomics stuff. And then we talk about psychological environment and the need for psychological safety and just culture. And psychological safety is seen as this sort of buzzword at the moment. It's like, right, we've got to get it done. What we can do is we can just give some people some training and then we'll create a psychological safe environment. And it's like, no, this is created top down. And, you know, the sort of definitions here from Professor Amy Edmondson, considered a world authority on this. Teaming, fearless organization. Another one is Brené Brown as an author, just talking about vulnerability and relationships that are going on. And my view is that psychological safety is a proactive framework. It's a construct that allows you to understand the potential issues, risks that you've got, and somebody is able to put their hand up and say, actually, Gareth, I've got a question. This doesn't look quite right. Can we speak about it? And it's like, yeah, go for it. And it's the leadership that sets the tone for the psychological safety. The influence and behaviors they have on what is rewarded and what is punished can support or destroy psychological safety. And there's a great book called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety by Timothy Clark, in which he talks about 4 building blocks. We've got inclusion, we've got learner safety, so it's okay to fail. We've then got contributor safety, so where it's okay to say something and contribute towards the team. And then most importantly, in high risk environments, we've got challenger safety. What we want is somebody to go, stop, we can't do this. But you can't have challenger safety until you've got inclusion, learner, and contributor safety. And you can quite easily destroy that building block process by just almost an innocuous or throwaway comment, and that destroys that. Now, the other side of it is just culture, and what I say here is reactive. So they're almost, I'm going to say, two circles that interlock over an event. And so psychological safety helps prevent the accidents by allowing issues to be raised, and a just culture is reactive in nature because it allows the story to be told in terms of how it made sense for those to do what they did. But at the same time, it's not a no blame culture, that actually when people are genuinely reckless and they're negligent, then actually, yes, they should be punished accordingly. But that shouldn't be the first tool that comes out the toolbox. Most of the issues we see are systemic in nature, either through social, cultural, technical design, the environment we're operating in. And the healthcare system doesn't necessarily set people up for success. And I would argue that success comes through proactive operations by individuals, despite the system that is designed to help them. They are creating safety and performance all the time. So, you know, just as in the last few days, so this was that 2 days ago, published Pakistan International Airlines crash from a little while ago. And this was the headline: plane crash, pilots were discussing coronavirus and lacked focus. Aviation minister says pilots were overconfident and not focused on their job. Great. That is not a great way of learning about what's going on. And so what they found out was actually the pilots were worried about what was going on in terms of their personal lives and their families. So the discussion throughout was about corona, Mr. Khan said, referring to conversation between the pilot and the co-pilot he'd listened to. Corona was dominant over their minds. Their family was affected. Several warnings and alerts, such as overspeed, landing gear, proximity alerts, were disregarded. And that's sort of the language. Disregarded, you could almost say, is the same as it, and disregarded is a language that says they chose to ignore it. But actually, if there's lots of stuff going on in your mind, you don't choose to ignore these things. It's because there's a limited capacity in our brains. And the paper that I've cited here, just talking about the impact that psychological distress has on error rates and failures and success rates. It is not a great place to be when you're in a high stress environment and things are going against you. So that's the sort of the environment piece. Now we talk about, randomness, luck, and uncertainty. Uncertainty is managed through emotions, whereas we often think we're managing risk through logic. And especially in a healthcare environment, we don't really have the numbers to make proper logical risk assessments. We think that there's this sort of distribution of, it looks like that. But actually, our emotions, we've got, recency bias, recall bias, and emotional context that says, I heard about that. It was really quite serious. Right, I'll elevate that as something that I'm going to pay more attention to, as opposed to, well, I've never heard of that, therefore it won't happen. And this is the difficulty. We are quite simple creatures at times, which is both a benefit and a disbenefit. And this is this bit that says, language is really important. How do you get the message across to others in terms of managing risk? And this is from a website called probabilitysurvey.com. And they asked people to put a numerical answer in for a word. So probable. What percentage do you think probable means? And it's somewhere between 45 and 95%. Sorry, 85%. Well, that's not really good when you're trying to explain to somebody, oh, I probably think it's this. Well, actually, it could be less than half, or it could be almost exactly right. So be very clear in try to use I'm going to say a bit more language. What's the evidence? And in fact, that's what I'm going to come on to in a minute, is the fact that risk, when we come to this probability piece, that doesn't help us very often, because we are wet finger in the air. And we, especially in organizations, we use these risk matrices to work out what's the score. And they're designed really as almost as a conversation starter and trying to rank what's important. And the problem is that we get rewarded on stuff that isn't in the orange or the red. So what we do is we move it down, and we do that sort of really quite subjectively. And I would say a better way of managing this is, how confident are we in the control, the effectiveness of the controls that we're putting in place? That's a much better thing to look at rather than the likelihood or the probability event, because actually the severity is there. Just assume that the probability is 1, and how are we managing that? And we've got these, hierarchy of controls that are talking about here. Use human factors specialists to understand and design your system to be as effective as possible. And we end up with, a lot of the time, administrative controls, training, checklists, processes as a way of managing the risk. But actually, we could go much higher up in saying, how do we design this out? Now, within the healthcare environment, we inherit a lot of the stuff, and so we can't do things like that. So look at the controls. Are they there for paper safety? And book here by Gregory Smith is a great book, in which he highlights that most of the litigation cases, he's based in Australia, most of the litigation cases from health and safety lawsuits are in a situation where it's about breaking the compliance, and people get punished for breaking compliance rather than the contributory factors that led to the accident. So they'll just go, oh, well, you broke those rules and we'll punish you for that. And you go, well, that had nothing to do with the activity over there. Oh, yeah, but we uncovered those during the investigation for that bit, and now we're going to nail you for this. Great. And then look at, when was the last time you verified or validated your control mechanisms in place? That work is imagined, work is done. And you speak to the guys in the office space, oh yeah, we've got this paperwork, we've got these risk controls. Okay, when was the last time we tested them? Oh, I don't need to test them because they're all here. And you go, really? Okay, let's go and see how it really works. Because if nobody's done it before, I can pretty much guarantee it'll be a mess. And the downside is that takes people out of work that they're supposed to be doing, productive work, but at the same time, it can certainly help your resilience within the organization to highlight weaknesses so we can put the barriers in place beforehand. So that's the first part. And what I'd like you to do, I just talked for about 20 minutes or so. What's your key takeaway for that first part of the presentation, where we're talking about the first part of outcomes, looking about risk, human factors, context, environment? What, just type in the chat window or type in the Facebook bit, just to get you thinking about what's going on.
Excellent. So we're just going to get the chat function up.
Okay, cool. I've got it on here anyway.
Excellent. Excellent. So I've got that on there.
And you've stopped the share, so I'm going to come across to here. That's cool. Psychological safety. I can thoroughly recommend Timothy Clark's book. Context is king, Paul. I totally get that. And when we see little snippets on social media of an accident happen and people go, oh, look at that, really stupid. You go, you've just got a 10-second snippet of what's happened. What happened outside of that? What happened outside of the frame and outside of the time space? So, and I'll come on to that in the next piece about context is really important.
That's fantastic, Gareth. So just a question from me.
Yeah, go.
Just within something you said there. How would you sort of mitigate your own biases? And I think that, the challenge with biases is that you're not necessarily aware of them, but being a mindful practitioner, how would you try to mitigate them?
So the first bit is the recognition that we are biased, and that we will make decisions in the heat of the moment. And so we're not, I'm going to say, not likely to know when we're in it. What we can do is we can approach a scene and say, I'm going to be stressed. I'm going to be under a time pressure. That means that I'm likely to miss information. Now, the last time I did this sort of stuff, what was the critical information that I missed? Because the bit after the event is you have a reflective exercise. Even if, if you're on your own, now you're just going to have to go through a mental debrief, and I've got a structure at the end to help with that. But it is this bit that says, in the moment, it is really difficult to stop yourself being biased. And Daniel Kahneman, the author of Thinking Fast and Slow, he gave it, I think it's the end of the book as well, but during an interview, he said, you know, he was asked the question, you're the master of this. You've done all this research. How less likely are you to be biased? And he went, I'm not. I'm pretty much as biased as everybody else. What I can do is I can spot them coming up. But when I'm sucked into it, it's really hard to reflect in time. And then you can look back and go, oh, so being mindful is key.
Fantastic. We've got a few more questions, but I'm just mindful of time, Gareth. Do you want
to? Sure.
Should we can answer these, maybe the question from Matthew at the end, and we'll do that.
Definitely.
So do you want to share your screen again? And
yes, I will share my screen. Here we go. So let's go back to the play. So you got the screen?
Yeah, got it up. Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, so the next bit. So non-technical skills. The middle model is something that I put together. You know, ultimately, people are trying to make good decisions, and they do that based on the information they're collecting through situation awareness, and that comes from communications, from the teamwork, leadership, and what we're trying to do is create this shared mental model with the operators we've got. And you know, if you're a solo paramedic, well, that's yourself, but you're going to have the dispatch team telling you stuff. When you arrive on scene, you're going to have to start collecting information really quickly, maybe bystanders, witnesses, other people there, the patient themselves, to help you understand what's going on to make the best decision you can. Now, on the left-hand side of this model is these performance shaping factors, predominantly stress and fatigue. They end up shrinking the attention span. You know, when we're stressed, the whole thing focuses down to what is important or what we perceive to be important. In terms of fatigue, I would look at it as basically it just foggies everything in general. And so other things may be amplified and they become the focal point. But I believe it's slightly different to how stress operates to what fatigue does. And then we end up on the outside that we're trying to support these non-technical skills through a just culture and psychological safety. Now, the decision-making processes we have, and this is the work that Kahneman and Amos Tversky done through behavioral economics. And unfortunately, you know, Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for behavioral economics, but it was a joint effort. Unfortunately, Amos had died a number of years beforehand, and so he couldn't be awarded it posthumously. So they came up with this sort of dual track process where we're talking about system one, which is the fast, automatic, biased, heuristic thought processes. It's incredibly efficient. We jump to conclusions without even realizing it. And that's because we're efficient creatures. What we're trying to do is limit the amount of mental energy that we consume by jumping to shortcuts. And our modern pace of life means that it's really difficult to operate in system two, which is where we slow things down. We take this concept of a tactical pause, and you know, how do you protect yourself from confirmation bias and the cognitive dissonances that Paul was talking about, or this expectation that you arrive on a scene and go, ha, I've seen one of these before and it's going to turn out like that. It's that bit that says trying so hard to guard yourself against that, and be in the moment so that we can slow ourselves down. And system two then unfortunately has a big cognitive overhead. It means that we're applying lots of mental energy that says we don't like doing that. Now, I came across a paper recently in the British Medical Journal from 4 years ago now, and they were just talking about this bit where you try to explain system one and system two as this dual track process as almost binary activities, but they're not. And that's why I purposely drew this sort of spectrum across the top where people go, oh yeah, well, it's system one behavior and it's system two. And they sit there and go, well, actually, there is this bit that goes in between, and it's easy to put them into buckets because, hey, that's a bias. You know, what we want to do is simplify this information. So there is the bit that we will jump to conclusions, and what we've got to do is reflect on it afterwards. If we can do it in the moment, brilliant, and there are tools to help us slow down for that. Because we have these mental models that we expect certain things to happen based on our previous experiences. That's what our technical skill development is about. And then through reflection, debriefs, and that sort of activity, we start to create higher fidelity models so that we are more likely to be able to predict what's happening in the future. Now, we end up with this double-edged sword between, which is based around assumptions, that gives us complacency or efficiency. And my view on this is that when things go well, we call it efficiency. When they go wrong, we call it complacency, because we are trying to be as efficient as possible and not pay attention. And this book from Christian Savastra, an Australian, just talked about the neuroscience of what's going on. This conscious incompetence, area A, and we're paying lots of attention to what's going on. When you're going through your initial technical training, professional training, there's a lot of mental overhead trying to work out what's going on. And as a consequence, you've got very limited capacity to see what else is out there. And then as we start to practice, what happens is we move things from the conscious incompetence into unconscious competence. When in fact, you can almost say that the unconscious incompetence, I don't know how bad I am. And then I start to learn and go, well, I don't know anything. And then you start moving by practicing things. And as we become more skilled, what happens is we stop paying attention to things because we're now operating in that sort of system one space. And as long as things go well, there's nothing to draw our attention back to the situation. So, but the benefit of this is now I have the capacity to see what else is going on around me and start building a better mental picture of the activity. And this is, you can almost see novice, journeyman, and expert as we go through this. And the terms are important when we come into a piece in a minute. Now, those cognitive biases that we use are essential. And the blog that I wrote here, this is an image from a guy called Buster, I forgot his second name. He basically took the 200 plus cognitive wheel that you can get from Wikipedia that looks at cognitive biases, and they all sit there and, laboratory type biases. And what he did was he basically dropped them into 4 buckets, which in itself is one of the biases that he's talking about here, is because we're simplifying stuff as much as we can. So he said, look, we've got too much information, so we use certain strategies. I've got not enough meaning, so I'm just going to fill stuff. I'm going to make stuff up. I'm not going to apply attention to that. I don't have enough time to do things, so in a rush, I'm going to jump to conclusions. And we build experience, and then through that repeated process, we get better at applying these biases. And then the final one is there's not enough memory, so we just, again, this bit about editing memories, we don't remember things very clearly. And the memory, it's not like a video camera that records stuff perfectly to tape. What happens is we pick the key points out of it, we record it and encode it. And then when we recount that story, there'll be a bit of corruption when we retell it. And in the retelling process, we then re-encode it. So it's like that sort of, that telephone whispers game that you've got where the story gets corrupted. And this is great where you get people who've been there together, eyewitnesses, a number of, period of time afterwards, and the story they tell isn't it's not consistent. So these biases are essential because they allow us to navigate the world at the real time. Now, people go, oh, well, I use my intuition. And this is a picture of Kahneman here. And he talked about, intuition only works if it's regular, so it's consistent. So we know with a high degree of confidence that if something happens, something, X leads to Y, cause and effect that's there. If you do lots of practice, and it's not just practice, it's perfect practice, it's repeatability that's going on, and you get immediate feedback. You know whether or not you got it right or wrong, so you can correct your mental model about what's happening. Now, we like to be confident about activity, and his comment there is, confidence is no value of competence. And you can tell that when people, yeah, I know what's going on here. And you're like, well, actually, you can look at modern day politics from that, because they have to come across as confident, because otherwise people wouldn't trust them. But then when they come across as overconfident and they don't know what they're doing, people don't trust them anyway. So, they're in a catch-22 situation. Now, if we don't have those three bits, regularity, practice, and feedback, what we do is we just make stuff up. We fill the gaps in with what we think should be the right answer. That's just human nature, how we're doing things. So the difficulty then is, how do we learn? Hindsight bias, we can easily join the dots afterwards. Looking back in time, it's easy to identify the relevant points because the chain is obvious. Looking forward in time, we've got multiple options, and it becomes very difficult to know quite quickly what the potential outcomes are. We will just take those best guesses. So hindsight bias doesn't help us. Outcome bias doesn't help us. The more severe the outcome, the harsher we judge things. So it might be that, we nearly got something wrong, but it came out as a successful outcome. If we don't reflect and see the train wreck that's behind us, then actually we don't learn. We just take that, oh, hey, great, we succeeded. And you sit there going, okay, what was the greatest risk we took in that process? And then finally, the fundamental attribution bias, that we focus when things go wrong in others, we focus on them and their internal attributes that they're talking about. So it could be about, lack of knowledge, that they're grumpy, that they're stressed. It's all about them when it goes wrong. But when it goes to success, we look at the outside. And what we need to look at is both sides of these things. We go back to context earlier. It might be that when somebody made a mistake, it's because they were tired, they were stressed. This concept of the halt moment, hungry, alone, late, lonely, and tired. Talking about that at the start of the shift, if you know that somebody is in a performance shaping situation, a biasing situation, well, actually, as a team, we could probably do something about it. Now, Kahneman talked, and Swirsky did a lot of work in biases in the laboratory situations. And Gary Klein recognized that actually that doesn't take into account the multiple things that are coming together, especially in high stress, time critical environments. And he recognized that, and his initial work was in fire commanders, military commanders in command centers. How do they make decisions in uncertainty with limited information? And what they did is they built up stories over time, and it was this tacit knowledge. It wasn't something that they could easily explain. And in fact, that was one of the challenges that they had during their research, was pulling this information out of them, because you'd ask the chief, how do you make a decision? Well, I didn't make a decision, we just did it. And went, well, you must have collected some information to be able to process on what was going on. And what Klein also picked up was that when you're in this sort of situation, these external decision support aids, they're rarely used because people are trying to do stuff on the fly using previous experience. And they're doing this sort of trial and error process. And say he started with fire teams, understanding how do you pitch up at a scene and know how to fight the fire. And the chiefs go, oh, we'd start looking at this sort of information. And he'd realized that actually and this is where the novice, journeyman, expert becomes important. Novices are given the basic skills to look for cues, what should be in place. And that goes into the journeyman's piece, where they're starting to understand how stuff should be done. And what he recognized was the experts could see what was missing. And this is a paper by Klein called Seeing the Invisible. And he said the difference between the journeyman and the expert was that the journeyman knew what should be there, and so did the expert. But the expert would sit there and go, that bit's missing, that doesn't look right. And it wasn't something that they could look on the scene and go, I'm looking for this. It would just be something that came up as a triggered thought and go, that's different. I need to know why, because I can't find that information. And what he had was this two-stage model. So you'd come across a situation and it would give you some visible, audible smell cues, whatever the technical word is for that, vibration, touch, all of those sorts of things that would say, it looks like one of those fires. It's probably that sort of fuel. It's probably that sort of building construction. And then they would say, let's fight the fire this way. Now, this way was based on an internal loop that basically said, have I been here before? Can I play the what if game in my head subconsciously and run these mental simulations? And the more models you had, the greater the sort of spectrum of simulations you could run, and the fidelity of those increased. And what he found was that the experts were able to pick up the cue, the relevant information much more quickly than the journeyman did. And they go, that, make the decision. Where the journeyman would go, I need a bit more, I need a bit more, I don't know. And by which time would make the decision for them. And I can see the same thing happening in your emergency medical care situation, where actually you have to do something, because doing something is better than doing nothing. Because once you've done something, you get some feedback, or you try and get some feedback and say, that was a bum decision, I'll try something else. What he said was, you didn't have this, the guys would pitch up and go, haha, I have 3 options here, and I'm going to weight them, because it doesn't work that way. There are decision support tools like that, and they are really in the system 2 space. So this is one that comes from aviation. How much time do I have? Diagnose the real problem you've got, generate some options, and discuss those amongst the team. Decide on one. Don't just discuss it and don't have it. Assign people to do the task, and that could be just yourself. Right, I am going to do activity. Review twice. Review the first time is, does everybody understand the task at hand and what we're supposed to be doing? Check of understanding. And the other one is the review afterwards to say, did it give us the outcome result that we were looking for? Because if it didn't, go back in again and say, how do we re-diagnose this and look at some other options? Other ones that I've come across, 4DEC, I've not used that before, but it's a similar process. And then another one is, how do you learn? And having a structure, and this is one that I've developed for my own stuff, is a debrief model that's structured, that people understand what's going on, that allows you to define what the task was and did we achieve it, set the example of learning, we're all fallible, so create psychological safety at this stage. What was the background? So the preparation to the task at hand, could we have done anything differently next time? Internal is, what did I do well, why, what do I need to improve on, and how? Why and how are the 2 most important bits there. I need to know why I did something well so I can repeat it. Don't just say, that worked well, I'll do it again, if I don't necessarily understand the process. And the same thing for how to improve. Knowing what to improve and how to do it are 2 very different things. External is the team, same process. What did the team do well? Why? What do the team need to improve and how? And then a follow-up. You've just done an activity. You've just done a learning exercise. What do you need to change? What do you need to file a report? Do you need to change some kit, some configuration, make a note and do it? So, and other ones, decision support tools, checklists are those that are there. They help you make decisions in a system 2 process. They are designed to slow you down intentionally so that you are taking robust steps. But don't write checklists for the sake of it. If people keep on doing things wrong, why? Look at the context and situation. Don't just go, right, time for another checklist. Because if it's not working, people will find a way around it. So, understanding how to make that decision, we need to understand how we collect that information. So I'm going to talk on situational awareness, and I will, this might answer the question from Paul in a minute. If not, we'll cover it. So there are 3 stages to the situational awareness model from Mika Ensley. Is we perceive raw data coming in. It has no meaning. That is sensory information. And we're getting billions of bits of information in, and we ditch most of them because we perceive them to be irrelevant. Then we process them and say, what does it mean to me now? And then we go, what happens in the future? And the difference between sort of novice, journeyman, and experts is the ability to project into the future. What is going to happen? If that journeyman novice has never actually seen this situation before, there's no way they're going to know what the future looks like. So that's situation awareness as a sort of a core term. Then we end up with decision making, and these things, they overlap. You know, the first part of decision making is gathering information so I can generate some options and select some options. Most of the time that happens subconsciously based on heuristics and biases. We do something, we execute it, the environment changes, and we pick up the changes. Now, at an individual level, we can influence what is important or relevant to us by training, by understanding our goals or our targets, or somebody might give us those, which narrows our focus. Expectations of what the future looks like, that mental predictions. At a system level, we can change the interface. We can improve or increase the task load. And if we increase our cognitive loading, not just in the task at hand, but if you've got, you know, you just come to work and you've had a massive row with a wife or girlfriend, you're not going to be paying attention to what's going on, or you defaulted on a mortgage, or, you know, there's all sorts of things like that. That reduces the overhead that you've got. Automation doesn't help situation awareness and decision making because it takes away your mental development process. We're not thinking about what's going on. And culture can impact this because it's, oh, don't worry about it. It works okay. In that case, I'll stop paying attention. So we've got stuff that's coming in individually to influence it. We've got stuff from the design. At the decision-making process, gathering information, this you know, computer phrase, garbage in, garbage out, the majority of errors are down to poor information coming in from situation awareness, and then a sound decision based on incomplete or flawed information compared to perfect information and a bum decision on it. So it's understanding what is important or relevant. And I know I'm going to speed up a bit. We only see those things we're looking for, we're expecting to see. So this is a piece that was talking about radiologists and missing a gorilla that's in the scene. And actually, it shows up quite nicely here, because actually by that I mean it's quite hard to see when the gorilla is in this lung scan that's there, 50% intensity, 75% intensity, and 100% intensity. The number of radiologists who missed that, and they were using eye tracking software, and the big blob that's in the scene, they were looking right at this, and they weren't expecting it to see it. And that's why X-ray scanners at the airport, security scanners, they rotate them in and out. Expecting a radiologist to scan loads and loads of things and expect them to see stuff, it's just not going to happen, unfortunately, and we're going to miss those information. So, you know, situational awareness, that ability to focus on what's important and or relevant, and be conscious of what takes our attention, this limited bit of focused attention. So how do we improve it? Understand what those limitations are. You know, situational awareness is that spotlight that's looking on it. So as a team, you can all bring information to the scene to create that shared mental model. And now you can illuminate with greater intensity what is going on, rather than just one spotlight that's there. But understand that this thing called dippy, dangerous, important, pleasurable, or interesting, if it's one of those, squirrel, and off you go. So be aware that those things will take your attention away, and you can potentially, through debriefs and reflection, understand what was taking your attention away from the scene and try to design that out, or at least be aware of the situation. Look for threats and precursors that will lead to mistakes. So threat error management, avoid, trap, mitigate is a term that they're using in aviation. So you know that you're going to end up making mistakes in certain environments. So let's design the system out, create a sterile cockpit, sterile environment, and make sure that we maximize the likelihood that people pick up relevant information. Then we can track them using checklists, decision-making tools to slow us down, and then mitigate it, because we can't get errors to zero. Build habits. So actually use your biases to a positive effect. Use overtraining. Now the downside is when you overtrain something, it's really hard to unlearn it. So if you overtrain using a certain skill, and then the processes or the procedures or whatever change in the future, then actually you can't unlearn something. What you've got to do is just keep on overwriting, and hopefully you get to the point. It's still going to be latent in there, but you hopefully make the new materials much more reliable. But be aware that when you start operating in automatic mode, you're going to stop paying attention to some of the critical factors, which is why teamwork becomes so critical, because what we're trying to do is share that model between us, and we talk about those support tools. So what I'll do is actually I'll just rather do the takeaway now, because I've only got 2 more slides to show, and then we'll do Q&A at the end. Buster Benson, Matthew, that's the guy, thank you. So one of the bits that, I showed this video, and I can't remember whether or not I've selected sound or not. If I stop the share and then reshare. And where's my Zoom going? And share computer sound. Because the audio is a bit important with this. So, when we've finished a task, really consider how effective we were in terms of our activities. And this goes to a point earlier on with Paul talking about confirmation bias, and being really, it takes a lot of mental effort to question what's in front of us, especially if we're in a team. And from that, we can watch this.
Rock and roll, man.
Have a good one, man. 3, 2, 1, yeah.
Whoa, shit.
Good man. Far.
Oh my god. Oh fuck.
Wow.
Sorry.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
No. Oh.
Ow, ow.
Oh. Woo!
Bang.
Yes.
Gorgeous.
Oh my god.
Yeah, bro!
Nice.
Woo, 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 woo!
And that was the DFR.
So be wary of outcome bias, because, that first sort of 20, 30 seconds there, they weren't convinced he was going to make it. So when you finish a task, ask the question, and there was a lot of uncertainty, and you finish, we're over there. Ask yourselves, were you lucky or were you good? Because if you don't reflect on how you got there, you can quite easily look at that situation and say, yeah, we did that the last time, but we do not know how close we were to the failure, to that unacceptable performance line that's there. So, in summary, look at outcomes being a multifaceted problem. And, from what Gianluca Casali, who's the thoracic surgeon, and myself, and I forgot Paul Cullen, put this paper together, saying actually you've got to take these as themselves, develop them, but recognize that they are, we believe, multiplicatory in nature. So you've got to be as high scoring as possible in a high risk environment, because actually you could end up with really high scores, but because they're multiplicatory, you might end up with a really quite low score without even realizing it. So that would be my final slide. Knowing is not enough. You've got to apply it. Willing is not enough. You've got to go and do it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. That's really, really informative. So absolutely fantastic. So I think what we'll do, I've got plenty of questions, but actually what I'd like to do is let those watching Facebook Live or indeed on the Zoom webinar to ask questions. We've got a few questions already, just from before. So this one's from Matthew around the pre-hospital environment. Is there any up-to-date specific literature, journal articles that you would recommend?
The answer is no, because I haven't read any for a while, but I can certainly go and do some digging, and I'll put them through to Ian, so that's fine.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So and then we can post them onto the social media feed. So just look out for them from there, Matthew. That's fantastic. Okay, so Okay, so looking at so Paul asks, regarding situational awareness on the previous slide, what are your thoughts on lack or loss of situational awareness being identified as an apparent cause, or sometimes a root cause by some?
Brilliant. And this is why I love having a whiteboard where I am at the moment, so I can draw this one, because actually lack or loss of situational awareness, you can't pay more attention, and I'll show you why. So this comes from Sidney Decker's book, Field Guide to Understanding Human Error. So if we think about time and what we know about a system, and that system can be anything that we're involved in. Now, as we are progressing through life, this system, what we're doing as we go along time, we're collecting more and more information about what's going on. Now, the gradient of that is it's irrelevant. It might be that there's a huge learning curve for something over the period of time that's going on. Now, this is what I know as I'm going along. Now, when something goes wrong, an external viewer after the event, using hindsight bias, will sit there and go, well, this is what you knew. Oh, you missed that bit, and you missed that bit, and you missed that bit, and you missed that bit. And actually, you didn't know anything about what was going on, because that's why we had, maybe the accident here or wherever it is. So that is what others know. That gap at that period of time is loss of SA. It's the delta between what you knew at the time and what others know now. So when somebody says they've got a loss of situational awareness, that's just like it's another bucket that says human error. It doesn't. So if we're going to improve, awareness, you can't say to somebody, pay more attention, because it's a finite capacity. What you can do is you can understand what the distractors were, what those dangerous, important, pleasurable, or interesting activities were, and say, actually, were they relevant? If not, the next time we come across that scene, guys, be aware that, in terms of paramedic care, I'm guessing when you arrive on the scene, the distractors, you start to filter out the bystanders. They're there. The first shouts that you do, there's a whole bunch of people around. And it's like, just get away and leave me to it. As you become more attuned to the task at hand, because that is the important situation you're dealing with, you will start to filter out those external people that are around. And so this isn't something that you can magic up. It is a gradual development process, and it requires reflection and iteration. So hopefully, oops, I'll just, there we go. So did that answer the question, Paul?
I think it did. Fantastic. Thanks. It's a bit...
Yes. Oh yeah, Paul, that bit about stay alert. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a cop-out. It really is.
Okay, good. Right. So next question would be, I believe, from Annette. She was just asking, can you reiterate what the abbreviation TEM stands for?
Yeah, threat and error management. So the next line down. And then the other bit is avoid, trap, and mitigate is another way of looking at it as well. So, try and get away from those things to start with, design them out, recognize that we will make mistakes. So, those who don't like flying, I'm sorry, but pilots making about 3 to 6 errors per hour on the flight deck. And yet, they're highly professional. And I could say probably the same thing in healthcare professionals, that they make mistakes, but what they're doing is they're trapping them before they become critical. So errors themselves are not necessarily, I'm going to say, a bad thing, because they're part of human nature. It is that they just happen. It is how they propagate and how they combine, and I'm trying to think the word, converge, that means that you end up potentially creating something new that you weren't expecting.
Gareth, that's fantastic. So just looking down there, just a question that I've got in my mind around sort of the Swiss cheese, really, and how we error trap. and just the Swiss cheese model, all these multifactorial sort of players coming into sync, and how we mitigate the Swiss cheese concept really, and we error trap. Fundamentally, are there any principles or take-home principles in your mind how either from aviation or from diving that you use to error trap in this way?
Yeah, so one of the ways is looking at this concept of error precursors or error producing situations. And there is a model which, again, I'll share, that came from the nuclear industry in the 70s, called the WIF model, in which they're looking at workplace design, individual capability, task demands, and human nature. And there's a whole raft of topics within those that says, actually, we can use this in a proactive way to say that if we're going to design work, let's look at these factors and saying, are we going to introduce problems? And you can use it almost as a pre-job brief type situation as well, which is where things like the HALT check-in at the start of a shift handover is that says that, if I'm hungry, if I'm angry or alone, if I'm late or lonely, and I'm tired or thirsty, those are psychological and physiological precursors to introduce error. Fatigue management is another one. And there's a massive amount of research in terms of performance under fatigue management or fatigue. And then we get into the ego side and the expectations of society and management to say, well, you've done it in the past and you haven't had any accidents, therefore you must be safe. So again, trying to influence them to look at error precursors and the context to put those situations. So yeah, I can share the document from INPO, which has got a lot of work in there. That there is no silver bullet, and that's the problem. People want to have immediate answers, and what they've got to do is look at these things in a systems or a holistic way, human factors way, to say it's when they converge. So whilst we might be able to fix that, there might be other things that we're not even considering. So again, why the debrief and the reflection is so important, where we have this concept as work is imagined and work is done. Your experts on the front line are doing work as done. They know how to do stuff. They are navigating all of the issues in real time to create safety and performance. And you'll find that those are quite different to what's written in the rule books, this work as prescribed or work as imagined. And what we're trying to do is close that gap between work as imagined and work as done. And that's not about forcing everybody to compliance to here, because it might be we've got to change the rules and we could innovate, and actually we could raise the performance. And so it is having the conversations with the frontline operators to say, how do you really do your job? Not what are you supposed to do? And they will only tell you what they're doing if you've got psychological safety and a just culture in place. So again, there's that bit that they all link together.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm just looking on the chat function and on Facebook Live. If there is any more questions, please feel free to ask and we'll filter them through to Gareth. Just from my perspective, as we wait for any more questions to come in, Gareth, what really fascinates me, and since I was listening to you last time actually, around the normalization of deviance, just looking at the micro habits that I have maybe that are covertly deviant, just looking at that text message that's coming in, if whilst you're driving, or the ping of the phone, and that kind of micro attention flick away from maybe the looking whilst driving. How do we mitigate some of these normalization of deviance practices?
It's really hard because we drift all the time, as individuals. That whole bit, and in fact, here we go. Here's time for another picture on the board. And it's great having this sort of stuff, and the ability to explore these. And so there's another one, sort of time, and this is sort of, well, again, we would just call it work, how we do stuff. This is work as imagined. So you've got processes, rules, procedures, even just stuff like having your phone. Make sure that it's in the glove compartment. And you're sitting there going, well, that's not going to happen because I use it for Waze. My car, I use my phone for sat nav because that's what it's there for. And so we have all of these things that we say, if we follow those rules, we'll be safe. The difficulty is that actually we start drifting and deviating, and we have a safe, scary moment. Ooh, that was a bit, and so we have this sort of stuff that goes on, and that is the gap. And people manage that gap all the time. And as long as we don't have an accident, we don't realize where we are. And so, in terms of a simple thing to manage that risk of distraction is actually, I've mounted my phone to the right-hand side of the steering wheel where the window pillar is. So it's there. It's out of the field of view of where I'm driving, because if it's there in the center dash, well, actually that takes out part of where I'm supposed to be driving. I know that I'm going to get text messages or whatever up there, which is better than having it down here. So yes, I could engage a car drive mode. So that's a process, a forcing that could happen. But at the same time, I don't want to be in that situation, because it might be that my wife's trying to get hold of me and there is a genuine reason for that. So it's about trading off those risks that we're trying to manage in real time. I won't engage with the phone, i.e. type or whatever. What I will do is when stuff pops, I'll glance, but then if it's not, there's, I don't know, 50 characters or whatever, I won't then go any further in to understand what's there. So it's that bit of what is the risk that I'm managing. Now, if I then get into a really busy environment, I won't even look at those sorts of things. So again, we're sort of dynamically managing that risk. But that means we've got to have feedback, and we've got to be reflective and honest with ourselves about how we manage those deviations. In the clinical environment, I'm sure there are lots of things that you do as almost a case of shortcuts to get stuff done. Be reflective and say, can I actually innovate? Can I raise this line by actually understanding what I do here? And from organization point of view, we have this thing called accumulations, where it's old equipment, the pressure is on, the weather's rubbish, all of these things. We have this bit here where they cross. That's an accident, that's where the interest in the organization goes, let's look at this stuff. You don't have to have that accident. You could stop time 5 seconds before that happened as an organization and say, let's look at all of this. This is all a learning opportunity to find out how people really do their job. And can we go, let's learn from this, as opposed to what you're going to say often happens if you don't have a just culture in place. You didn't follow the rules, you're nailed, you're fired, off you go. And you're sitting there going, if you don't understand why people are breaking the rules to achieve the goals, firing somebody doesn't change the system, and the next person who takes that role will end up making the same mistakes because they are environmental and system driven.
Yeah, fantastic, Gareth. Okay, just a couple more questions, I think, before we finish off. So just one from is it Christiane or Christianist? Are there any models how to manage situations where cues to developing situation are also detractors to the job you have to do?
So what I would say for this is probably a team thing, because actually you have a finite capacity to what's going on. So if you are going to be in a situation where your capacity is going to be limited, and I don't know whether or not you've seen the Whodunit video, that's a classic one that shows the benefit of teamwork. And so it's this bit that says, if I am going to be sucked into the task at hand, what I can do is I can delegate the oversight to somebody else. And then it's that bit, from a pilot's point of view, is you have control, I have control, you have control. So there is a positive handover, there is a positive takeover, and then there's the confirmation. When you are finished your primary distractor role, and now you need to come back out, and then you can provide the oversight. You can say, John, I've got the capacity now, I've got the control. Okay, you've got it. So now we have, positive handover, positive takeover, and now you're using the team capacity to share, because not everybody should be sucked into the same task, because if you are, you will miss the other stuff that's going on around you. And that requires you as the leader. If you're going to be the anaesthetist or the surgeon who's relinquishing control, that's really quite hard. But it also means that you can be vulnerable and say, I'm just about to go into this. It's going to be task loading. I might be missing something. John, can you take the oversight for the moment? These are the critical factors I want you to look out for. And if that happens, give me a shout. Don't just sort of hope that I've seen it, because if it's critical, tell me loud what it is. And my first name, as opposed to Mr. and Mrs. or whatever, and I saw something on the, I think it was Royal College of Surgeons posted something recently about how to do a debrief, or how to do the World Health Safe Surgical Checklist. And it was all about roles. It wasn't about names. And it's like, yeah, I get that that's the status that's there, but that's not how you create psychological safety within a group. You've got to flatten that authority, which is quite hard for people, because you go, I've just spent 10, 15 years getting to where I am. I want that status. You go, yeah, fine. But if you want to be part of a team, you've got to have really low levels of authority gradient that's there.
So
hopefully that answered your question, Chris.
I'm just thinking, perfect. So Annette asks Gareth around the fundamentals of human anxiety. So just reducing situation awareness, or the fact that anxiety sort of starts to offset situation awareness, and sort of how we can manage anxiety, and then hopefully, I suppose, improve situation awareness as a result.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the bit of limiting the stressors that are there, so you've now got more capacity. So there's a tool that, so I run my own business called The Human Diver, and I'm also a consultant for another organization, Paradigm Human Performance. And one of the tools we use in Paradigm is called spheres of influence, or spheres of control, in which you look at issues. What are the issues that you can influence, and what are the issues that you can control? And if you can't influence and you can't control, it's really hard. It's easy to say, it's really hard to do. Stop worrying about it. And I'll upload a link for that for people to download a PDF and look at the sort of exercises. Now, in terms of anxiety itself, talk about it to the team. That's where the halt moments come in, a sort of shift handover or task handover, is saying, actually, do I have one of those stressors? Because that bit about a problem shared is a problem halved. If you're an optimistic person and a compassionate person, that's true. If you're not, a problem shared is my problem now. Thanks very much. And that's not very useful for me, because I'm now looking after your problems. You say, well, actually, as a team, we should be sharing the team capacity when it comes to empathy and compassion that's there. So that's how I would look at these things, of trying to be, which then goes back to psychological safety from the leadership, saying it is okay to put your hand up and say, you know what, I'm maxed out here. I'm really stressed. The kids are playing up at home. I'm not getting much sleep. Okay, do we need to back the task down? And that requires leadership skills to turn around to the management and say, enough is enough. We are going to back off. And I get that you're in the business of saving lives. The irony of that is that if you end up trashing your operating team through fatigue and stress, you may end up losing more lives because you are unable to spot the issues before they become critical. And that's me speaking from a desk and not being in that situation. I've been in that situation in operations where we're sitting there going, we need to manage fatigue here, because when people are falling asleep on the approach to the airfield, that is not a good thing, because we are just absolutely maxed out. And the answer is, well, you haven't crashed in the aircraft yet. Yeah, okay, that's not a great way to be managing safety in a reactive way. So hopefully that helps, Annette.
Fantastic, Gareth. Thanks for that. So just one more question, just to finish off, if that's okay, and then I think
Yeah, sure.
So Dimitri asked a really interesting question on Facebook Live around how we maybe from a cultural or societal perspective, how we sort of change the culture of sharing mistakes, and then how we learn from mistakes, because from a cultural and or societal perspective, if there's a culture of shame and or attribution of blame, I guess that could be really, really difficult.
It's massively difficult, and the media, what is it? If it bleeds, it leads. In terms of the headlines, that there's no selling of stories when it comes to positive, the sort of the learning that goes on. Hey, hospital made mistakes and they learned from it. Awesome, well done. You'd never see that on the front line of the newspapers. And so there's a huge societal pressure for excellence to be in healthcare. And as I don't know whether or not it exists in healthcare yet, I do know it exists in aviation in terms of legislative protection. So when information is submitted for a safety investigation, it cannot be used in a legal proceeding. And there is a number of case studies where that information has been requested and it's been turned down because the impact would be massive on aviation safety. And I don't think that exists in healthcare. The leadership within the trusts. So, where I try to explain this in the diving environment, it's an unregulated situation. Lawyers are often looking for cases to sue or to support litigation. Trying to create psychological safety and just culture at a team level to start with. And then you can start to grow trust and learn trust there. Then you can start to grow it at a department level or a hospital level or a trust level. Trying to get it at a national level would be, it would be awesome if we could, but it is incredibly difficult to do so. The health safety investigation branch, I think it is, or body, has started some of that process, and the work by Martin Bromley and the Clinical Human Factors Group in trying to create change. And you've got to start off with this recognition that we're all fallible. We all make mistakes. So if we can get that concept across, then we're sort of on the way to starting that journey. I know of a paper or an article in the Midwest in the States where the trust, a number of hospitals, or they don't necessarily have trust, but they have companies that are running multiple hospitals. And they turned around and said, we're going to be open. We're going to tell the patients and the families what had happened. We're going to say sorry. We're going to make a compensatory payment, but we're not going to defend the situation. We're going to be open and transparent. And the impact was massive, because what happened is people then weren't in a conflict situation trying to sue for bigger and bigger amounts, because you end up with conflict and people are just escalating. At the department level and at the hospital level, what was happening now is people were saying what was really happening. And so the organizational learning went through the roof as well, which meant that the number of errors went down, the number of litigations went down. And so actually it was a win-win, but it required huge confidence and trust in the management and the leadership to turn around and say, look, we can't just keep hiding this stuff. We've got to change attitudes. And it's that wholesale change at the trust leadership level. It sort of says it's there at the national level, at the government level, but I don't believe it. Because if people are not hitting targets, that's what they get punished for. So what happens is people will do stuff to hit targets. So it is a huge journey. I mean, it's 40, 50 years in aviation to get where it is. And I just shown a bit in Pakistan International Airlines, pilot's fault, you're to blame. Well, you're dead, great. That doesn't help us. But that stops other people talking about the mistakes they've made. So even though aviation as a sect or as a enterprise, as a domain, is held as this sort of scene of excellence or domain of excellence when it comes to just culture and safety, when you start looking at it at certain airlines and certain cultures, then it doesn't exist. It's only really the mature areas that are. So it's not an easy one.
That's absolutely fantastic. So I think what we'll do is we'll finish off there, because that's a great place to finish. But Gareth, I just want to thank you for your time today, because I'm mindful we've been going for an hour and a half plus the prep for the session. So thanks for your time today, Gareth.
Oh, thank you very much. I love it. And as I said before, I'm more than happy to be here and talk. As you can tell, I'm somewhat passionate about it. So if anybody's going to listen to me, I'll talk.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Excellent. So, and to Caroline's point, yes, I'll provide a list of good books to look at.
Fantastic. Cool. So I think what we'll do, guys, we'll finish off there.